Quick reminder that the description has a link to a resource website that you can use to help contribute to ongoing Black Lives Matter organizations. You can do a myriad of things like donate to bail funds or sign petitions, all of which go a long way to fighting systemic racism. Thank you very much for your time. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Now, I've fallen in and out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Several times over the years, and one of the times I came back was around Shadow Specters, and in a format dominated by Girja, Mermail, and Firefist, I decided to walk the path of the Bujin. And ever since, I've had an affinity for these ancient Japanese deities doing their best Yu-Gi-Oh! GX impressions. In fact, it might be where I get a lot of the deck building preferences that inform my decisions to this very day. Singular iconic boss monsters, a number of toolbox options both in the main and extra deck, a propensity to use cards that make the game very confusing and unfun. Anyway, you can imagine my elation when I saw that Lightning Overdrive would contain a new wave of Bujin support, complete with ways to speed up their plotting pace. Is it enough to compete in the big leagues? Well, while Calamities is in the format, no, but let's ignore the very fun dragon for now. We'll start by going through each category of Bujin so we're all caught up on their mythology, review what scholars have discovered in Lightning Overdrive, then compare it with similar texts to see if we can discover even more. It's time to get our game on with Bujins. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 5,000 subs and you can help make it happen. I've got a very special explained video I want to do to celebrate that particular milestone, but I'll save the details for when we get to 3,000. We've also got our Discord, where we've scientifically proven that Bravely Default is the best JRPG, and a Twitter where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. Thank you all for your patience, and now, back to the video. This time around, we'll be talking about the archetype in categories, rather than covering them in chronological order. The Bujin game plan doesn't really change much as new cards are added, just refinements on the formula, so the only thing we'll be holding until the end are the Lightning Overdrive cards. Let's start with our main deck Beast Warrior Bujins. They're all level 4 Light Beast Warriors, and you can only control a single copy of any of them, save for one, and I attribute this to them all being modeled after the characters of GX, because they're all one of a kind. And we can't build the deck without the Jaden of the bunch, Bujin Yamato. They have 1800 attack and 200 defense, and once per turn during the end phase, you can add a Bujin monster from your deck to your hand, then send a card from your hand to the grave. This is extremely important, not just for sculpting your hand for future plays, but getting your Bujins with grave effects into the yard so you can use them to handle a variety of situations. But it would have been cooler if it set Bujin spells and traps directly from your deck, because throwing down some face downs is approximately 12% of Jaden's personality. Next is Bujin Mikazuchi, the Chaz of the group. They have 1900 attack and 1500 defense, and if a Beast Warrior Bujin or Bujins you control are destroyed and sent to the grave, you can special summon Mikazuchi from your hand. Also, once per turn during the end phase, if a Bujin monster or monsters are sent from your hand to the grave while you controlled Mikazuchi, you can add any Bujin spell or trap from your deck to your hand. This is how you'll get your utility cards, and they combo really well with our Winged Beast Bujins, as they'll send themselves from your hand to the grave to activate their effects, but it can also work with Yamato if they end up discarding a Bujin with their effect. Mikazuchi can even stand in for Yamato if anything happens to him. Aw, look, Chaz and Jaden really are buddies. We're not buddies! Next is Bujin Arasuda, the Bastion of the team. They have 1600 attack and 1900 defense, and if a Bujin monster in your grave or on your field is banished, you can special summon them from your hand in face-up defense position. Also, during the end phase, if a Bujin card was added from your deck to your hand, except by drawing it, you can draw a card, then discard a card. This card does a lot to show off Bastion's intellectual and tactical acumen. They're summoned to the field when your game plan is running smoothly, like when you're banishing your Bujins from your grave to activate their effects, and if you tutor a card from your deck, he rewards you with another card, and the ability to set up your graveyard even further. But much like how Jaden and Yamato both run the show and should be played as often as possible, Mikazuchi and Arasuda work better as the supporting cast, so we won't be playing many of them, if any. Oh well, back into the obscurity bin with you, Bastion. It was nice seeing you again. Next is Bujin Harume, who takes after Alexis. They have 2000 attack and 1000 defense, and unlike the previous members of the Schoolyard crew, they can't be normal summoned or set. Instead, they must first be special summoned from your hand by banishing a Bujin monster from your grave, except another copy of itself. But if they're summoned this way, and they get destroyed by your opponent and sent to the grave, and if both players have cards in their hand, you can have both players discard a card. That last effect is a lot of text and very conditional, but I wouldn't focus too much on it. The big deal is that they're a mostly free Bujin we can put on board, and while we haven't introduced them yet, we are playing an Xyz deck, so the more material we can call to the field, the better. It's one of our many roads to victory. The last Bujin for this category is Haruko, and this time they represent a villain, Sartorius. They're a normal monster, so you can have multiple of them on the field at a time, and a pendulum monster for some reason. They're also the only Bujin pendulum monster, so don't get any ideas about splashing pendulums into this deck, but that's not too much of a problem because they aren't going to be staying on the field for very long. As a pendulum spell, you can banish Haruko to Xyz summon any Bujin Xyz monster on top of one you currently control, so it's essentially a rank up magic that you can search with Fire Formation Tenki. It can also help get the notoriously difficult to summon Bujinki Amaterasu onto the board, but don't expect any support for coin flipping. Or tarot cards for that matter. Our next category is all about the support Bujingi, and they can be split into 3 subcategories: on-field beasts, in-grave beasts, and in-hand winged beasts. And with the exception of the first one, I won't be going over their battle stats, because they aren't meant to stay on the field for very long, and this is already a pretty long list as it is. However, no matter what, they're always level 4 and light. Let's start with the on-field beasts. Bujingi Warg has 1200 attack and 1900 defense, and while they're in face-up defense position, other Bujin monsters cannot be destroyed by card effects. Alternatively, Bujingi Wolf has 1100 attack and 2000 defense, and while they're on the field, other tri-types, to borrow some Tri-Brigade phrasing, cannot be destroyed by battle. Both of these are fine. Providing protection for other cards, especially your bosses, is always something to look out for, but you want to make sure it's efficient and effective, and these two are neither. They don't protect themselves, making them very easy to deal with using incidental removal, and the hoops you have to jump through to get them onto the field and in defense position isn't really worth it. These are some good doggos, but not really good cards. Okay, time for our grave beasts, and we've got problem solvers, protectors, and utility. The 2 problem solvers are Quillen and Centipede, and yes, it's a beast, not an insect. I don't know why they stuck with a bug if keeping to the tri-types was so important to them, but we can't change that now. You can banish either of them from your grave while you control a Beast Warrior Bujin to destroy a card on the field. Quillen destroys any face-up card, while Centipede can destroy spells and traps. And with Yamato constantly searching them up and sending them to the grave, you'll have some quick and easy removal to take care of just about anything. Well, I mean anything from 2013. Nowadays, targeting and destruction protection are running rampant, so they're not as important as they used to be, but keeping one of each on hand just in case is a pretty good idea, even if Centipede being treated as a beast still bugs me. Next are the protectors, Turtle and Hare. As a quick effect, you can banish Hare from your grave to grant any Beast Warrior Bujin immunity from battle or card destruction one time, while Turtle can be banished anytime any of your Bujins are targeted by an effect, negating it. These are still must-runs, especially Turtle, though how much mileage you're going to get from it is largely dependent on if hand traps and effects in general are targeting that format. Still, it's always good to have some insurance policies available when building a deck around high-investment boss monsters, and these two cover a wide range. Personally, I like Turtle more, but only by a hair. Next are the utility beasts, and they all have wildly different effects. Boar can be banished from your grave while you control any Bujin monster to change an attack position monster to defense position, then zero out their defense until the end of the turn. Fox can prevent all damage during a turn at quick effect speed by banishing itself from the grave and sending a Bujin monster from your hand to the grave, and Sinew is a graveyard honest. You can banish them from the grave whenever a Beast Warrior Bujin battles, so they can gain the attack of whatever they fight, but you deal half the usual amount of battle damage. The utility Bujingis don't really see a lot of play, especially the first two. They don't really affect the board state, and with a deck as slow as Bujin's, every card counts. Sinew is in contention with a future entry, Bujingi Crane, as both of them have honest-like effects, but I think there's room for both. Sinew guarantees that you'll punch over whatever you fight, and regardless of the damage reduction, sometimes that's what you really need. Now if only it wasn't just a color-swapped Quillen. Now it's time for the in-hand winged beasts, and we've got a lot of them. And since we just talked about them, let's go over Crane. When a Beast Warrior Bujin battles, you can send Crane from your hand to the grave to set that Beast Warrior's attack to double its original during that damage calculation, making even the lackluster Arasuda a 3200 attack beater. This is already a pretty powerful combat enabler and deterrent, and it has the benefit of being effective no matter what you fight. Honest, for instance, will guarantee that you get over anything you fight, but won't add much value when you attack something like an 800 attack Appaloosa. But with Crane's semi-static attack gain, you essentially get a second attack with that monster. Now that's what I call beak performance. But they're not the only ones that modify how your monster attacks, though none of them have seen quite as much play. But they work in a similar way, though you discard them during main phase 1 and not during damage calculation, and they can be used on any Bujin. Ibis grants piercing, Ophidian lets the monster attack directly, and Swallow grants the target 2 attacks in one battle phase, though you can only attack with that monster. Now, there are some edge cases where these effects would actually win you the game outright. Since Swallow grants attacks, not attacks against monsters, you can stack it with Ophidian to swing twice into your opponent out of nowhere, but that's discarding 2 cards that don't have any other utility. And wait a sec, is Ophidian just a snake with wings? And it's not a reptile? How do they keep getting away with this? But the birds aren't just for attacking, they can also be used defensively. If a Beast Warrior Bujin you control is targeted for an attack, you can send Crow from your hand to the grave to negate the attack, then burn your opponent for half of the attacker's, well, attack. If a Beast Warrior Bujin is destroyed by battle, you can send Pavo from your hand to the grave to summon a new one from your deck, or send Raven to the grave when any Bujin you control is destroyed by battle to destroy that opponent's monster. However, none of these are particularly good, especially since the last 2 only trigger off of battle destruction. I mean, you could conceivably win a game out of nowhere by magic cylindering your opponent with Crow, but if I wanted to murder with Crow, I'd go out and find an actual murder of crows. The last winged beast is Peacock, and they're a tricky one. You discard them during main phase 2 to add any Bujin monster from your deck to your hand, which is already pretty grating since you won't be able to use any monsters searched in the battle phase, but it also precludes you from using the effect of any non-Bujin card before or after its activation. This means no splashy rank 4 toolbox, no hand traps to intercept plays, not even something as innocuous as a mystical space typhoon. This was an on and off pick for the community back in the day. Bujins were strong enough that, despite the restrictions, getting to Yamato this way was still considered a strong play, and the game was slow enough that a single turn without off-theme assistance wasn't going to ruin your day. But now? Sorry Peacock, but you're off the roster. No one likes a show-off. Okay, now it's time to cover the extra deck Bujins, my favorite. And much like their main deck counterparts, they're all rank 4 light beast warriors, and you can only control one of each, with one tiny exception that we'll get into later. For now, let's start with Bujinte Susanoo. They have 2400 attack and 1600 defense, and require any 2 level 4 Bujins. They can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each, which is probably the biggest argument for Honest, since it would carry the attack increase from the first battle to all the others. And they aren't just an upgraded version of Yamato in the lore, they act like one too. Once per turn, you can detach a material to add or send to the grave any Bujin monster from your deck. It's basically Yamato's end phase effect, but quicker, it can actually plus you, and puts any of your friends in just the right place to help you out. So this level of power and aggression is less like Jaden and more like Yubel Jaden. Bujinte Kagetsuchi has 2500 attack and 2000 defense, and requires any 2 level 4 beast warriors. When they're Xyz summoned, you mill yourself for 5 cards, and Kagetsuchi gains 100 attack for each Bujin card milled this way. Also, if one or more of your Bujin Beast Warriors would be destroyed, you can detach a material from them to keep one of them safe. Now, funnily enough, this is actually kind of bad for Bujins proper. You normally want to use Grave Beasts as material as much as possible, because they have grave effects that you can use once they've been detached from their Xyz monster. Beast Warrior Bujins, not so much. It's actually seen a lot more play in Lightsworns if you'd believe it, turning spare Wolves and Felluses into a 2500 attack beatstick that can protect itself, while also, more importantly, milling yourself for 5 more cards. Way to be a team player, Chaz. Bujinte Tsukuyomi has 1800 attack and 2300 defense, and requires 2 level 4 light monsters. Once per turn, you can send your entire hand to the grave as long as you have at least 1 card, then draw 2 cards. Also, if they leave the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can target and revive level 4 Beast Warrior Bujins in your grave up to the number of material Tsukuyomi had on the field. Now this is much better for Bujins. It ensures you'll get some monsters back if you're afraid you'll get hit with effect removal, and the card draw is nice, but once again, another deck put this card on the map. ABCs just love the idea of turning spare material into a discard outlet for their unions, which could then draw you into even more extenders and fuel your Buster Dragon. ABCs, folks. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Our last Xyz monster is Bujinki Amaterasu, sporting 2600 attack and 2500 defense, requiring 3 level 4 monsters, and they have a quick effect that changes depending on whose turn it is. On your turn, you can detach a material to target and special summon one of your banished level 4 or lower monsters, and on your opponent's turn, you can detach a material to target and add to your hand one of those level 4 or lower monsters. Ironically, though the material requirements are easier to meet, it can be a chore to get that third material onto the board, which is why Haruko is so important. But once you have them on the field, you can use their effect to bring back your banished grave beasts to not only reuse their effect, but also use them to make more Xyz, and add cranes back to your hand to make Amaterasu a frightening 5200 attack during damage calculation. Just what I would expect from a monster that's Alexis Rhodes but with a sword. Our last extra deck monster breaks the mold a little bit. Bujinki Ahashima is a Link 2 with 1500 attack, requiring any 2 monsters with the same level, and they represent Serena, Sartorius' younger sister. They can't be used as Link material, but you can control multiple of them. You know, if you want. If they're Link summoned, you can special summon 2 monsters with the same level, one from your hand and the other from the grave, negate their effects, then perform an Xyz summon using those 2 monsters only. So if you have a quick and easy way to get the material for Ahashima onto the board, that's a whole other boss monster for you. Also, if an Xyz monster they point to activates an effect by detaching a material, except during the damage step, you can target a spell or trap your opponent controls and destroy it. This is a pretty nice include. The additional spell and trap destruction adds a little extra value, but if you have the material to make Ahashima, you may just want to go ahead and make the Bujin you wanted. Honestly, this ends up being another card that's more suited for other decks, specifically ones with higher ranked monsters that are difficult to field. If you can link summon Ahashima with easier to summon material, you could support decks like Photons and Trains. Boy, don't you just love it when your support shows up and helps another deck? It's so very, very fun. Alright, time for the spells and traps. Bujin Regalia the Jewel is a normal trap that you can equip to a rank 4 monster you control upon activation. The monster gains 300 attack for each of its material, and once per turn you can attach a Bujin monster in your hand to the equipped monster. This would be nice if it wasn't so slow. Attaching your grave beasts to Susanoo for more searches, or Tsukuyomi to ensure more revivals is nice, but the attack boost isn't that significant, and really could just be a different trap that's removal or negation instead, so it certainly isn't the jewel of my collection. Bujin Regalia the Mirror is a normal spell that you have to activate at the beginning of your main phase 1 while you control a Beast Warrior Bujin, and if your opponent controls more monsters than you do. But once it does resolve, neither you nor your opponent can activate spells or traps until the end of your opponent's turn. So it's effectively Cold Wave, but it requires you to have set up a monster. Which is the kind of thing you use a card like Cold Wave for. What a bird-brained card. Bujin Regalia the Sword is a normal trap that either puts a banished Bujin back into your grave, or adds a Bujin from your grave to your hand. Out of the 3 Imperial Treasures, this is the best one, resetting your grave Bujins and your birds, or getting back your Beast Warrior so you can play them. It's still not an amazing card, but it's a horse that turns into a sword! A horse sword! I want one! Bujin Carnation is a normal spell that you can activate if your opponent controls monsters and you don't. You can target one Bujin in your grave and one that's banished and special summon them, but you can't use them as Xyz material except for the summon of a Tri-type monster. This was a pretty crazy card back in the day, essentially being a 1-card Susanoo that could get you back into games you were behind in. And while it did preclude you from using the then format staple Silent Honor Arc, that wouldn't be much of an issue once Castel hit the scene. But be careful how you use it. Activate it enough times and you might accidentally reincarnate it into a Tri-Brigade deck. Buj Incident is a normal trap that has you targeting a Bujin Xyz monster you control. On resolution, you banish it, then return all monsters on the field to the hand. Then, until your second end phase after activation, neither player can summon, though they can normal set, and neither player takes any damage. Then, when that effect fades away, you target a Bujin monster in your grave, the banished Xyz comes back, and then you attach the grave Bujin to the returned monster as material. I don't have anything to add here. If I could rename cards, this one would be changed to card made specifically to waste everyone's time. Bujin Fidel is a normal trap that has you tributing a Beast Warrior Bujin to target and summon a Bujin of a different name from your grave. This is already a pretty crummy revival effect, resolving as a -1, but the cherry on top is that you have to tribute specifically a Beast Warrior Bujin. You know, the ones you have to keep on the field to keep accruing advantage. I mean, I guess you could tribute one Beast Warrior for another, but you could also just play Back to the Front. Or Monster Reborn. Heck, Call of the Haunted is better than this. Buj Intervention is a normal spell that has you targeting a Bujin on the field, then applying the following effect until the end of the turn. Each time it destroys a monster whose current attack is greater than or equal to the targeted monster's original attack, you banish the destroyed monster, and if you do, banish all monsters in your opponent's hand, grave, main deck, and extra deck that match its name, which is another overly complicated effect that's very situational. For instance, if you're battling Blue Eyes, you can give a Yamato Buj Intervention, attack the Blue Eyes, boost your attack with Crane, and since Blue Eyes' 3000 is higher than Yamato's original 1800, you would banish every Blue Eyes your opponent has, which would also include any active alternative dragons, which is pretty funny. But look, I'm just saying that if I see anyone playing this card, I'm giving them a Buj Intervention. Our last card for now is Bujin Unity, a normal spell that you can activate only if you control no cards and only if you have at least one card in your hand. If you do, you shuffle all Beast Warrior Bujins in your grave into your deck, then send your hand to the grave, then you can add 3 Beast Warrior Bujins with different names from your deck to your hand. Does every Bujin spell have to be a textbook that says nothing? Man, the deck was good, but they did not get any worthwhile support. Like, it can refill your hand with relevant Bujins, and it can vent cards into your grave to enable them, but even Lightning Storm lets you have set cards for crying out loud. I'm in favor of unions, but this one needs to get busted. Just play Pot of Avarice instead. So this covers all the currently available Bujin cards, but what do they do? Well, the plan was a sort of protect the castle style strategy. You keep Yamato on the field until you can get Susanoo, clean up your opponent's entire board with them, and if your opponent tries to retaliate, use the protection and removal Bujins to keep your divine damage dealer safe. But it's hard to deny that it's extremely slow and lacks any ability to interact with your opponent, outside of the most pedestrian of plays. So how do the new additions change this? Let's start with a new Bujin Beast Warrior, Bujin Mahitosu, who's doing their best Maximilian Pegasus impression. And yes, they are a GX character. Who do you think painted Rainbow Dragon? They have 0 attack and 1800 defense, and you can send any other Bujin card in your hand to the grave to special summon them from your hand. And once per turn, you can either send a Bujin monster from your hand to the grave to add a differently named one back to your hand, or banish a Bujin monster in your grave to send a different Bujin from your deck to the grave. You can also apparently control more than one, which is kinda nice. This is probably going to replace Harume, if only for the fact that they can set up your grave in hand in addition to being a body you can summon. You just gotta keep a close eye on your resources. Next is another Beast Warrior, Bujin Torafune. To me, they resemble quite a few monsters. At first I thought it was either Neos or Avian, but Wikipedia lists it as Honest Neos, and yeah, that makes sense. They have 1500 attack and 500 defense, and you contribute them to summon 2 Bujin from your deck with different types in defense position. That's cool. And when you Xyz summon a Bujin while Torafune is in the grave, you can equip Torafune to that Xyz, and you banish any monster that's destroyed in battle by the equipped monster. This card kicks. Rescue Cat is just what Bujins need to ramp things up. Immediate rank 4 access with no restrictions, so you can use your entire toolbox, and if you summon a Bujin, you get a little extra bonus, which goes great with Susanoo, letting you mow down and banish a whole field of monsters. Honestly, this is amazing. The last new card is Buj Intersection, a continuous spell that grants Beast Warrior Bujins immunity to your opponent's effect destruction, except during the battle phase. For some reason. Also, once per turn, you can send a Bujin from your hand or face-up field to the grave to target any face-up card your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. Lastly, during the end phase, you can send Buj Intersection to the grave to target a Bujin in your grave and special summon it. I guess the last effect is okay. It's very reminiscent of the end phase shenanigans of the original 3 Beast Warriors, but the first 2 are really nice. Your big bosses are just that much harder to interact with, and the ability to turn off problematic spells, traps, and monsters will help said bosses get through for big damage. It's definitely at the intersection of old and new Bujin design. So that's everything, including all the new cards. Our game plan hasn't changed much, in fact it's gotten even more streamlined if you can believe it. Torafune is a magnificent opener and gets us off the block immediately. Now we just need ways to play in a modern environment. But what can we use to help facilitate that? Negation and interaction are things that Bujins still lack, but thankfully we should have a lot of room to tech it in. You should only need to run 17 main deck Bujins to make the theme work, especially with the inclusion of Tenkis, leaving you lots of room for hand traps and other small engines to splash. It's not as good as having searchable negation, but some themes are so massive that they need every card in the deck, so at least we have some leeway here. And an engine we can try adding is everyone's favorite band of rebel dissidents, the Tri-Brigade. I'd previously tried to mix the two at the height of Tri-Brigade fever before, but both themes have come a long way since then. On top of recent Buj improvements, Kit being added to the Tri-Brigade lineup gives us even better access to our extra deck. Ahashima ends up just using cards in your grave rather than material from your hand or field, making it much more economical, and Double Dragon Lords just gives you a compulsory evacuation device every turn, which can be a tricky piece of interaction to work around. Since we can't go back to the good old days of Kaiser Coliseum Bujins, the closest thing we can settle on is Mystic Mine. Hey, I see you typing, get out of that comments section. Bujins have a long, proud history of making this game as unfun as possible, and you will respect that. Unfortunately, it's not quite as good as it is here than in other decks like Striker. Although if you're set on it, you could make a version that turbos out Amaterasu, discarding an Ophidian to give it a direct attack, use Amaterasu's effect to recycle the Ophidian after you've banished it, and if you manage to upgrade them with a Swallow as well, or a Zodiac Whiptail for the extra material, then that's game. And speaking of Ophidian, it could make a comeback because of, well, AA Zeus. It just makes any deck that has an Xyz monster better, so using direct attacks to ensure you get the New Age Exciton Knight might actually be worth it. But since the Bujin Xyz are pretty big anyway, that might not matter. As for a silly card to add, I don't have anything that's super out there, but you'll definitely get a kick out of playing Horn of the Phantom Beast. You're already a pretty battle-focused deck, and the 800 attack boost can really help you get over a lot of things. Also, because you draw whenever the equipped monster destroys another, giving it to Susanoo makes it a 3200 attack beater that can attack everything, and a huge advantage engine. And that's all I have for Bujins, but now, I want to hear from all of you. Do you think that the GX team of Ancient Japan has what it takes to chill out with the crew at the schoolyard, or will they just be finding trouble? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. And if you want to see those games where I put Bujin and Tri-Brigade together, I've got it linked for you right here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.